The Chinese psyche. The Chinese psyche has been formed more in the past 170 years than in the nation's previous 4,000 years of civilization. There is a litany of national humiliation, conflict, and turmoil suffered from the 1840s to the 1970s. It is only since the late 1970s that China has seen stability and the opening up of its economy and society. That is, modern China less than 36 years old. We discuss below China's political, economic, and social psyche based on its recent history. Opium Wars, the unequal treaties, beginning of a century of humiliation. The First Opium War, 1839 to 42, was fought between China and Britain and marked the beginning of the demise of the Qing dynasty when it failed to halt the importation of opium by UK merchants, Scottish merchants. This was the commencement of so-called century of humiliation and the period of unequal treaties when foreign empires, predominantly Great Britain, France, Germany, Russia, US, and Japan, extracted territorial and sovereignty rights and received indemnity payments from a weak China. Foreign armies were stationed on Chinese soil. The Second Opium War, 1856 to 1860, ended with the sacking of the old summer place in Beijing by British and French forces. The Sino-French War, 1883 to 85, and the First Sino-Japanese War, 1894 to 1895, saw more Chinese territory ceded and war reparations made. Taiping Rebellion, 1850 to 1864. Civil war began when the Chinese Christian sect rose against the Qing dynasty. The initial rebellion army consisted of mostly the Hakka people. It is estimated 20 to 30 million were killed or died of famine. The American Civil War during the same period saw an estimated 1 million killed. The Boxer Rebellion, 1899 to 1901. Peasant uprising initiated by one of China's many secret societies against foreign imperial forces and Christian missionaries. Boxers were ultimately defeated by the Eight-Nation Alliance of Western and Japanese armies, who then occupied Peking, Beijing. Atrocities committed by both sides, including massacre of Chinese Christians by the Boxers and pillaging of the capital city by Alliance troops. The warlord era of China, 1916 to 1928. Northern Expedition, 1925 to 1928. The Second Sino-Japanese War, 1937 to 45. Chinese Civil War, 1946 to 1949. Chinese warlords divided the country into fiefdoms following the downfall of the Qing dynasty and the rise of the Republic of China. A military campaign by the Chinese nationalists 1925 to 1928 resulted in the end of the warlord era, although minor warlords continued till the 1940s. A civil war between the Chinese nationalists and the Chinese communists was followed by the Japanese invasion of 1937. It was a horrific period of war, pillage, atrocities, and famine, with millions of military and civilian casualties. Great leap forward, 1958 to the early 60s, and the Cultural Revolution, 1966 to 1976. The Great Leap Forward was a failed campaign to reorganize China's rural communes, which ultimately led to widespread famine, more than 15 million deaths. The Cultural Revolution was a campaign to renew revolutionary fervor that led to political purges, persecutions, distrust of one another, and social and cultural upheaval on a massive scale. The history of upheaval suggests that China is, one, prone to a divide and conquer stratagem where subgroups of the Han Chinese with their different dialects can be led by warlords, secret societies, or religious groups. 2. China's poor and uneducated with nothing to lose can be easily persuaded to rebel as a way out of their misery. 3. Once there is internal conflict, China will be weakened and will again be picked off by foreign powers. As a result, the Chinese government will not tolerate any attempts at weakening its single-party rule. This includes any pro-democracy activity or organized religions. They view harsh political repression as inconsequential compared to the risks of another 100 years of humiliation recurring. They seek to provide economic well-being for its people so that they will have something to lose and thus earn their support. Economic psyche. China used its export industry, domestic urbanization, infrastructure developments, and industrialization in the 1980s to 2000 to give its economy the critical mass to move to the next phase. China has noted that Western countries also sacrifice their environment to achieve this critical mass. Recall British society portrayed by Charles Dickens on the mid-1850s on pollution, child labor, etc. This was at the same time that Great Britain was building its empire in the Far East. This new economic phase in China involves the expansion of its consumption, technology, and services economy. It has noted the failure of Japan's Zaibutsu or giant conglomerates to provide a suitable economic path during the 1990s. So it is encouraging mass entrepreneurship, that is small business, and downsizing its giant state-owned enterprises. For mass entrepreneurship to succeed, the rule of law is required to build a level playing field where small business owners feel they will have a fair chance of succeeding. So the crackdown on corruption in China will continue until this rule of law is well established. China's risk is that it has to rule by law, excessive red tape, because its people do not observe the rule of law. This is based on the premise that the rule of law functions most effectively when the golden rule is observed. The golden rule is to do to others as you would like them to do to you. Social psyche. The golden rule is weak in China, given its history of suffering. It is manifested in the saying, "You die, not my problem." In 1840s to 1970s, when your entire neighborhood is dying due to poverty, famine, and war, it's hard to care for your neighbor as you would want them to care for you, since neither has any resources. FOMO is strong in society, the fear of missing out. Kaisu, in the Hokkien dialect, is the fear of losing out on an opportunity to always try to get ahead before others. It is reflected in the momentum trading style of retail Chinese investors and is derived from China's recent history of deprivation. Pragmatism. At its heart, the Chinese are pragmatic because of their determination to be economically successful. This is reflected in frequent reminding of the Japanese atrocities committed in the 1930s and 40s in China, and yet 2 Japanese cities are ranked in the top 10 places visited by Chinese tourists on short-term holidays. The ugly American and the ugly Chinese, this is not unique to China. It is human nature that when an individual becomes wealthy relatively quickly, her expectations of services rendered increases, arrogance and sensitivity to a loss of face rises, and insensitivity to others' custom arise, particularly when outside of one's own country. Recall the rights by Chinese passengers at airport terminals when the plane is delayed. Recall the extravagance displayed by some of the newly rich. Guangxi. To survive during the 1800s and 1900s of turmoil, a non-existent rule of law, and the "you die, not my problem" psyche, family and close connections became critical to survival. They were the only ones you could trust. This continues today. Corruption and values. All of the above allows corruption to take root. Once it does, it grows because it becomes harder not to be corrupted. Corruption also takes stronger roots in the society without any values or virtues for them to aspire to. In most societies throughout history, the local religion provided a public line in the sand, value system. In China's atheist society, the government now is tolerating religion as long as it's not politically organized. It has also reinstated Confucian teachings at school and has issued core socialist values being national goals of prosperity, democracy, civility, and harmony. 2. Social goals of freedom, equality, justice, and the rule of law. 3. Individual values of patriotism, dedication, integrity, and friendship. All education institutions are required to teach these values. That is, ethics classes, Chinese style. The government's challenge is to ensure that what is thought eventually becomes what is done in society.